Hello, and welcome to another episode of A Single Window. So, today we're going to talk about the last shape, which is our triangle. So, if we look at our original Philosopher's Stone symbolism here, this would be one of the larger ones that is connected to the whole circle, but withheld within it, which will be eventually important. Also, Trinity was the one that the one was after, so Neo got her direction. A lot of what he did was kind of trying to save her in a lot of situations, or at least being directed by. And Trinity, tri means three, so Trinity, and this is something relating to different symbolism in potentially different religions of the Trinity. Uh, we'll chat more about that though. So triangle, it's interesting to consider first of all that typically when there's an issue that's at hand, or even if there's some sort of topic in the world, so say we're having to split up different elements of science or whatever else, you'll see the predominance of all these trinities, all these three things that are sort of divisions of the singular thing, which is what we're observing. And I could get more into that, and I will eventually, but it's unbelievable how many things are, if you break it down, it's going to be three kind of branches that it goes off from. So one of the reasons for this is we obviously recognize that we live in this dualistic world. So things are defined by the other extreme. So if we look at this like this, we can say that there's the thesis. So I have a idea. And if we want this just to make it simpler, and I don't think this is the best way to go about this, but it's what we know. So thesis, antithesis is be something different, and then there's synthesis. So if it's true, both of these tell something of what is the whole. Uh, there's elements of both, and then they eventually become this one. We have one that goes like this, and then we've also talked about another one that goes the other way. So let's see how well I can draw a triangle here backwards. And of course, this is a symbol that's in a lot of iconography, and most famously the Star of David. Geez, this really bothers me. This isn't that high. Okay, it's a little bit better. But anyway, there's these two opposites, and one representing the one way and one representing the multitudes. So, to me, this is probably one of the reasons that this has became so predominant throughout time, is that there's sort of two ways. There's one going for one aim, and there's one going for another aim, and we have to understand each of these in order to understand the collective better. And the best way to do that, I think, is to go back to ancient Greece. And we're going to talk about Plato's Cave here. And a lot of people have kind of made Plato's Cave about just education and people teaching, and they're sort of the dominant milieu of whatever society you're in, of like the ideas that are spread, and those are the dominant ones, and you're supposed to go against it. To me, that is not what Plato's trying to get across here. And if you know Plato's corpus of his work fairly well, you know that this is probably what he meant, because of all the people that he was studying and all the ideas that he was most interested in. So what we're going to do, actually, before we talk about the triangle, we're going to talk about that part of the triangle before the circle. To help define it, we need to kind of define this a little bit better in this situation. So we talked about it last day as being this perfect. If it's true, we're not saying anything. We're just saying these are ideas, and there's a lot of examples that can be alluded to, what we're going to, but perfect, changeless, and boundless. So those are three of the criteria that seems to be pretty universal for everybody that tries to describe it. For you, those of you that kind of know Indian cosmology, I guess you could say, they had this concept of sort of Brahman. And Brahman is this undifferentiated, and we're going to describe it as sort of what is outside here. So this kind of looks like undifferentiated light out here. I mean, obviously we know that there's probably just normal world out here, but the picture as a allegory of what we're trying to talk about will be best to think of it as just undifferentiated light forever if you want. And that's kind of like Brahman. Brahman's kind of this undifferentiated, boundless, changeless, timeless thing that always is. It's just life itself. It's the nature of life. It's this, and people in Hinduism will talk about the veil of Maya, and I love that word veil because that is the most accurate word I can think of. Is illusion, and that's what the sort of caved in world represents, is this world of illusion. The person in ancient Greece had talked about this, and the one that nobody could really refute. So Plato's mentor was Socrates, and Socrates always got in these dialectical debates. So one side against another side, and they would argue over something, sort of like thesis, antithesis. They'd be going at the two sides, and then hopefully there'd be this truth that was realized out of it. So this synthesis. And this is why Socrates considered himself the midwife of truth, is because he'd be there trying to provoke the person into talking, and out of this situation that he didn't really have any presupposition of what the truth was, out of it would come the truth, and he would just help it out. And he wasn't really like giving the truth. He was kind of passively doing this process, in which if you read the dialectics, they don't really feel that way. I don't know how much Plato put his own ideas into things, because we don't have anything directly from Socrates. But anyway, Plato, the way he presented it was that he always won these debates. Like he always made the other person kind of come to this realization. The only time where that wasn't true and that Socrates kind of got beat was the dialectic with Parmenides. And Parmenides was an old man. Socrates was a young man when the dialectic took place. And he kind of took him to school. And what he did was he rationally explained how this boundless truth, this timeless, changeless bit, is true through rationality. And he rationalized it to the point that Plato and Socrates took this as true. So that this thing here always existed. So they just, after Parmenides explained this to them and how he kind of beat them in this dialectic, they just acknowledged that this is true. And I'll show you a quote to kind of demonstrate that. But that this boundless world that is divorced from this one, this Maya world, if you will, the world of illusion, is separate. So I know these are a lot of really challenging things right now, but just try to stay with me and try to just kind of just entertain the idea. There was also another person that I think deserves a little bit of a nod here, and that is Anaximander. And the way he described it was the apeiron. Pyron, I think that's how you spell it. And that was the same idea, the perfect, changeless, boundless. This is what everything came from. And all these thinkers, Anaximander was actually before Parmenides, but people often divide the pre-Socratics, so people before Socrates and Plato, they divide them into two by Parmenides, because everybody kind of understood through reason Parmenides' position that this existed, this what we've talked about before. I don't want to repeat myself too many times. But I think I already did. So you may be saying, okay, well, that's interesting, but what about movement? How do you explain movement if everything is one and everything is this undifferentiatedness, I guess you could say. And the best way to demonstrate this is, I think, through a little bit of an animation here. So we have a rock. I don't know if you notice it. You're on the top of the screen. So I'm going to do a little animation and we'll talk about it. So drop it, bang, 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 hits the ground, and now it's resting on the ground. So perceptually, that rock moved. So you saw it, right? It moved across the screen. Keep in mind Everything is relative to one another. So if you know anything about computer graphics, the rock didn't move. Uh, this whole situation is the way that it would be split up as far as if you're going to present a rock moving, that's a million different little images of that rock moving that gave the perception of movement. So it's not that it actually moved, it gave the perception of it. And it's just like a dream. A dream, you see movement, but this is just all against this canvas of your psyche, mind, whatever it is. It seems like it's moving, and it gives perception of movement, but it's not doesn't I'm not saying that it doesn't, but I'm saying that it doesn't naturally have to be. It could be just like a computer screen. So what we see in the world could be like this computer screen that gives a perception of movement, but never really does. And people talk about one of his students, Parmenides, one of his students, and he had all these mind experiments about how to explain this. And I think you're on the wrong track if you go down that route. I think one of his students' name was Zeno, and he gave the Achilles and tortoise analogy, which is really a famous thing. But I don't think that's the right way to go about this. What Parmenides was saying, in especially in his, he's got a really famous poem that he explains some of these ideas. But for now, let's just take how Plato sees what he says. So movement doesn't necessarily have to be movement; it just has to give a perception of movement. So, according to Plato, this world's been blocked off, and we forgot it existed. There is a fire in this analogy. It's right over here, and there's a wall that exists right around here, and then there's a procession of people walking. So there's like 4 or 5 people, let's say, and they're all carrying things that are taking the light from the fire. And these are these perfect ideas and are casting shadows onto a cave wall. So the cave wall has this giant screen, and there's a bunch of people on the bottom here that only know this world. So they only know the world that's given to them as an image. So just like we were talking about with that rock falling down, they just know those images, and they all talk about them, and these images are their world. So they're in shackles, they're tied up, they don't know any different. This is what they know. So of course we know that they're stuck in a cave, but they don't know that. In Plato's story, one of them gets released, and he goes up here. He goes through this hard process all the way through this bad situation, and then comes out on the top. And once he's on top, it takes him a while to adjust to it, but he eventually realizes this world is far better than the cave world. And feeling empathy for his comrades, I guess, his people that he was with, he comes back and tries to explain to them. When he tries to explain to them the real world, and they're looking at just these images, they all hate him. They think they know more than him because they know more about the screen, because he's kind of forgot about the screen a little bit, and he only cares about light, the light world. Because this is, I mean, now it's kind of like when you wake up from a dream, you lost the anchor that made it seem real. So this doesn't really mean anything anymore. It's just this image that had no meaning. When he comes back and tries to tell them that, though, they're angry about it, and they eventually try to kill him, or at least the idea was they had the idea to kill him. So that explains the best I can about not everything besides the triangle. So if we think of this as this whole image, what we explained with this cavern is really these level and this level, which was this level was out here and this level was inside. So we've left everything besides what we're talking about. So we've isolated it at least, but now we need to discuss it in a different way. Okay, so in my opinion, this is Plato's quote. In my opinion, we must first make the following distinction. So Plato, knowing these two sides, one being this sort of circular, bigger world, and he sort of accepts it as true, so doesn't even really question it. And we'll see that here. So what is that always is and has no becoming? So something that is endless, boundless, whatever. And on the other hand, what becomes continually and never is. So the world is never stopping moving. It's always this constant flux. We talk about that river in the last episode and how you can never step in the same river twice and how it's changing continually and everything in the world is changing continually. So you can't ever say anything that can be solidly true forever. You can look at the stars and you can kind of get things to orient yourself, and I think that's what the ancients did. But you can never really anything that we touch with our hands, we can't really do that, or in firsthand see with our eyes. Besides, obviously, what I just already mentioned. So both of these are true, is what he's saying. And he says the one is comprehensible by the mind with reasoning. So he's talking about the first one, right? So what has no becoming and always is. So it's just it always was, always has been, is boundless, endless, just everything. It's only comprehensible with the mind and reasoning. So the example we gave last time was mathematics and geometry is the only way you can kind of comprehend these things. And Plato was a big proponent of those things. And then the other is conjectured, he says. So we just made assumptions by opinion and irrational sensation. So you can't trust your sensation. So we believe now that everything should be sensually supported, but they're saying that those are irrational, that you can't trust them. You can't trust your senses. And I can give you lots of examples where that's true and how opinion influences those things, but that's not really the place of this particular episode, so we'll just leave it be for now. Becoming and passing away, but never really being. So it seems to be real, comes and goes, but there's no real being of which there always is. So, like I say before, an idea of a triangle can always exist in the mind, but no triangle made of any material on Earth will ever remain throughout time. So that's kind of his point. Okay, so let's do our best here. I don't know if this is something we should be doing right now, but Pythagoras, another big thinker during this period, had something sort of like Pythagoras we know as sort of this mathematician, but all these thinkers were really doing math for bigger purposes, and he sort of had his own, like people kind of called it a cult, but he had a sort of a religious group that formed around him, and he sort of became this demigod within their system, so like a half god. And one of the things he would talk about is this holy number of 10. And we can do this based on what I just told you. So we talked about this one a little bit the other day, but let's start with this one. There is this one, which in reality is 2. So think of this line here as like a reflection. And that picture we gave is maybe a representation of that. Maybe this is conjectured, as Plato just said. But they're sort of representing the elements of themselves they can't see almost, and they're sort of this mere reflection of just awareness. And this is sort of 1 divided by 2, but 2 is 1 in these first 2 levels. And maybe I haven't explained that well enough. I'll have to go through my stuff and see if I explain that to what I think would be sufficient amount. This one's always consistent, this side, but these 2 became 3 at some point. And really one of the sides split to become those 2 sides that we've been talking about, which is the square and the circle side. So forgive the fact this is separated, or put in the wrong sides, but it became 3, and then 3 became 4, and that equals 10. So 4, 3, and 3 more is 10. 7 plus 3. So don't think of this as far as like this happened, then this happened, this happened. There's one mistake in what we'll say here today is this was created. And when 4 of these were created, this was automatically created. So another big thinker back then was Empedocles. I should capitalize that. Empedocles. And Empedocles talked about sort of the fire element, so this would be fire up here. The fire element was sort of these three interconnected triangles. And that was the simplest form. And then when it became the second most simplest form, which is air, so fire, let's do this, fire, air, it would just add another one of these triangles. So when you add another one of these triangles, it becomes this, air. And then this was created in that moment, this sort of square. But this is not really anything that existed. Everything was just these. This was supposed to be the sort of the heavens, if you will, if it were Empedocles, was this triangle sort of simulation. But this got added with 4. So one of these isn't true. I'm not going to really explain why, but I'm just going to say that it's this one, which is water. So water is something that we'll get to later, but this is also earth. The rest of these are kind of transition phases. So this is transition phase, this is transition phase, but these are sort of representations of one triangle nesting on top of the other, like these sort of Star of David things we had before. The bottom of this star rests here, the top of this line goes up here, and this sort of makes that star that we were showing before. So a lot of big conjecture here, but I thought this through quite a bit, and it seems to me to make a lot of sense. We'll talk more about it. I mean, some of these things I'm going to explain to you, and you're going to say, well, that's a heck of a leap, but I'll be able to support it all. Trust me, I figured this out. I'm kind of starting from the end and working backwards, trying to lead people to show all this stuff. And I'm trying to find the best way forward, but it's not always going to be apparent as I'm going. So it might be just looking like you're driving on a random road sometimes, but you got to trust me. This is all thought through in every different aspect. So it may seem odd right now, but you're just going to have to stick with me. But anyway, that's enough for today, I think. We'll talk to you soon. Hope you have a good day, and bye-bye.